What is up, hockey fans? Welcome to the Wraparound brought to you by Sticks.com and the Hockey News. I am your host, Emma Lingan. I'm joined, of course, by my wonderful co host, Michael Augello, and we are here to talk about all of the latest and greatest bite sized storylines from around the NHL. Of course, we've got the Stanley Cup final going on, but plenty of other storylines around the league that we're going to get to as well. Before we do dive right into those, do want to let you know that we are brought to you by Sticks.com. Why break the bank on sticks when you can get pro level composite sticks without the pro price tag at Sticks.com? That's STIX.com. Head over now and gear up. All right, Mike, of course, we got to start with the Stanley Cup final. One of the biggest storylines, I think, from this series has, of course, been Brad Marchand. I mean, his legacy just continues to grow with this playoff run, of course, with a different team now. He's with Florida instead of Boston. He scored twice in the Panthers' 5-2 win in game 5. He's got 12 career goals in the Stanley Cup final. It's the most of any active player. So, of course, Mario Lemieux is the only other player to score 5 goals in multiple Stanley Cup finals in the last 59 years. So, considering what the Panthers gave up to get Marchand for what could be just this one Stanley Cup run because he doesn't have a contract yet beyond this year, how do you think that he ranks as one of the best trade deadline acquisitions in recent memory?
Well, I mean, it's up there. I mean, everybody who has looked at trade deadline acquisitions going back, the name Butch Goring, and this is, for somebody as old as I am, that was the name. Butch Goring was acquired from the LA Kings by the Islanders, and he helped them win their Stanley Cup run in the late 70s, early 80s. This is pretty close to that. Now, it's a one and done probably because I don't know whether Florida is going to be able to pay him what he could get on the open market. I mean, there's talk about him getting a 3 or 4 year deal at $7 to $8 million. He's going to cash in because he gave the Bruins a discount on an 8-year deal and then didn't get paid off at the end. So it's probably going to be a one and done for him. But I mean, it's been a phenomenal addition by Bill Zito and the Florida Panthers. I think the most hilarious thing after that game was Matthew Tkachuk and a couple other players shooting plastic rats at King Rat, because that's one of his many nicknames. It was sort of apt. It was perfect, actually.
He is the Rat King, that is for sure. Going to the other side of the ice in the Stanley Cup final, though, Edmonton, they are now down in this series 3-2. So this is do or die mode for them once again. They've been pushed to the brink of elimination by the Panthers. Now, this is a team in Edmonton that we've seen come back from deficits, not only in these playoffs, but during the regular season as well. Their comeback ability has been pretty remarkable. But, that being said, how would you evaluate the Oilers' ability to really rise to the occasion in these high pressure situations?
Well, I mean, they came back from 3-0 last year. This is a slightly different team. They came back from 2-0 against LA in the first round when everybody was, sticking a fork in them, but they were done. I think this is a little different, but you also have to factor in Florida when they've had a chance to shut the door, especially against Toronto in the second round. They were up 3-2 after killing the Leafs in game 5. They went back to game 6 where they should have shut the door, and Toronto won 2-0 and forced the game 7. Now, obviously Florida killed them in game 7, but they had an opportunity on home ice to not have to go back to Toronto, and they didn't take advantage of it. So is it impossible that Edmonton, stands up and has a good game and forces a game 7 in Edmonton? No, it's not impossible. I think it's probable that Florida wins, but it's not an impossibility that Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl summon up the will to force a Game 7 on Friday in Edmonton.
I mean, we've been saying for weeks now, it seems like this is a series that has to go to 7 games when it's a rematch again. Of course, now the momentum is all in Florida's favor, so we'll have to see what happens there. Want to move on, though, to the biggest, probably non-playoff storyline from this past week, and that's the New York Rangers. They made the first big move of the offseason. They sent Chris Kreider to the Anaheim Ducks for a prospect and a third-round pick in 2025. So, of course, more big moves expected to happen here. Arthur Staple from The Athletic wrote this week that it's possible that Chris Drury and Mika Zibanejad have already discussed moving on. Moving on would be best for him and for the team. And Zibanejad now has 5 years left at $8.5 million AAV plus a full no move clause. So he is entirely in the driver's seat in this situation. But what do you think, Mike? I mean, looking at the Rangers where they're at, of course they got rid of Trouba last season. They've now gotten rid of Kreider. What do you think? Do you think Zibanejad's the next to go? And if so, what's the team that you think could be a good fit for him?
Well, I think the problem with Zibanejad, and he's still a good player. He scored 62 points last year. And he's 32 years old. And with 5 years left in the contract, I don't know how many teams are going to sign up for 5 more years at $8.5 million, even though the cap is going up and $8.5 million isn't as onerous as you would think. But I think he didn't have a particularly great year. It was inconsistent, but 62 points is 62 points, and centers are centers. So in a league that is, wanting and needing centers, and there are certain teams that are looking for help up the middle, it's possible. But I think, the no move clause here is going to provide Zibanejad and his agent the ability to pick and choose where he wants to go. And that if the aim of Chris Drury is to get a good return for Mika Zibanejad, that's not going to happen. If he says, I'm going to Seattle, for example, okay, then Seattle is going to lowball them because they know the guy wants to go there and he knows that the Rangers want to move him. The Rangers, with the Kreider deal, accomplished one thing. They cleared cap space. They didn't get a great return. It was Terrence's, I think it is a middle of the road prospect, not great, but they cleared the cap space. So that was the thing they wanted to accomplish. Now they can go out in free agency and sign somebody for that $7 million that was vacated. But they want to get something more for Zibanejad because he is a center and he should have some value, but I don't know whether they're going to be able to accomplish that. I don't know how necessary it is to move him, but Chris Drury seems very, let's just say, motivated to move him.
Yeah, and it seems like the Rangers have, again, going back to the Trouba situation last year, it seems like the Rangers and Drury have lost quite a bit of leverage, I would think, in terms of making deals on the open market here, because, as you said, Drury seems very motivated to move on from these players. He's made that clear. So not quite sure about the strategizing on that one on his part, but we will certainly see what happens. Let's head to upstate New York, Mike, and I'm sure you'll have some thoughts on this. Elliot Friedman said on 32 Thoughts this week that Sabres GM Kevin Adams is now listening to offers on JJ Peterka. Of course, Peterka's an RFA. He finished second in team scoring this season with 27 goals and 68 points in 77 games, and he played on Buffalo's top line for the majority of the season. So, in your opinion, in your informed opinion, Mike, is there a way that the Sabres can move on from Peterka and yet still take a step toward being competitive? Or is he a player that should be part of their core that they're trying to build around?
Well, I think Kevin Adams wants to keep Peterka, but the indications out there, and, Elliot Friedman, who is as tied in as anybody, for weeks has been saying they don't want to trade him and they're not going to trade him. And now all of a sudden in the last few days, he says they don't want to trade him, but they may have to trade him, or at least they're listening to offers because he clearly does not want to play in Buffalo, or at least that's the signal that he is sending out through his agent, Alan Walsh. Now, we don't know whether this is a ploy to get a better contract and more money, or if he's so unhappy that he goes out and signs an offer sheet. But the problem with an offer sheet is Buffalo will match. And if he signs an 8-year or 7-year deal someplace else and Buffalo matches because they have a ton of cap space, then he's stuck here for 7 years. So they don't want a player who doesn't want to be here. So they at least have to listen to offers around the league. And as Friedman said, he says, well, if you're going to make an offer and you're interested, then bring your best offer. This team, if they're trading young players like Peterka, they have to get players, not prospects, not draft picks, players back. Peterka's got 4 years of retention. He's a restricted free agent coming off his ELC. He's got 4 years before he qualifies for unrestricted free agency. They need to get somebody back who's got just as much or more, because we know Buffalo has difficulty attracting free agents and making trades for players who might have no trade protection, and has Buffalo on their list. So they have to it has to be a hockey deal, and it has to be for a young player of comparable age. Otherwise, I tell Peterka, sign here or go to Germany and play for a couple years, because we're not trading you.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, to your point, though, about the length of his contract, if he were to sign an extension, I mean, they managed to offload the Dylan Cousins contract, so it is possible, but definitely an interesting situation in Buffalo. Staying there for a moment, another top trade candidate who's definitely been discussed in Buffalo is Bowen Byram. So Buffalo, obviously, they're very deep on the left side, got a lot of sort of a logjam on the blue line back there. And again, Byram, 23-year-old RFA, again, needs a new contract. He is coming off, for what it's worth, his healthiest and most productive NHL season. Of course, he's got a lengthy history with particularly head injuries that has maybe, kind of slowed his development a little bit. But this past season, 38 points in 82 games. He was plus 11, averaging almost 23 minutes of ice time a game. So again, the Sabres are in a good position here if they do decide that they want to trade him. What are your thoughts on that one? Do you think that he's a guy that they should prioritize trying to trade, or should they be trying to find a number that works to keep him?
Well, there's no acrimony here, but the problem is that the Sabres have 3 left-handed defensemen, and 2 of them were top overall picks. And those 2, Rasmus Dahlin and Owen Power, are signed to long-term contract extensions. They traded Casey Middlestat to acquire Byram a little over a year ago. He had a really good year. He played top pairing minutes. Dahlin had to play his offside most of the time. But he's never going to get power play time because of Dahlin and Power. And I'm not so sure Buffalo is willing to pay Byram what he's looking to be paid based on the fact that they have Power and Dahlin under long-term deals. So he's 2 years away from unrestricted free agency. So again, it falls under that conundrum for Kevin Adams to make a hockey deal. He's a good young player. He wants to be a top pairing defenseman someplace else. He's got the offensive ability to do it. He can play big minutes when healthy, but they want to get somebody of comparable age back in that deal. And that's the tough thing. It's like I heard, I think it was Pierre LeBrun say, there are no sellers right now. None. It's like the Pittsburgh Penguins might be the only team that is selling right now, which means everybody's buying, which means, who knows if anybody wants to make hockey deals, because if everybody's buying, they don't want to subtract from the team that they have right now. So it's really a difficult landscape for Kevin Adams and Jarmo Kekalainen to navigate, because they want to get value for Byram. Worst case scenario, they qualify him and they walk another year towards unrestricted free agency if they can't make a deal that makes sense to them. I don't know what's going to happen, but they've been listening on Byram since the end of the season.
All right. Well, you mentioned the sort of unique qualities of this year's this off-season market, with no one being true sellers other than, as you said, maybe Pittsburgh. So that brings me to another interesting case here, which is Nashville. Obviously, they were the big movers and shakers at during last year's offseason. Of course, they get Steven Stamkos, Brady Shea, Jonathan Marchessault. They re-signed UC Saros. I mean, they made all these big moves, and it could not have worked out more poorly for them. They finished 28th in the league this season. Again, no one really has the answers as to why this team, I mean, there's certainly speculation and certain things that have contributed to it, but it really just makes no sense. And it just kind of seems like, maybe there's a temptation to think this past season was just a one-off, and they'll be able to rebound this year. But obviously, of course, the big investments that they made in trying to add scoring to their roster were Steven Stamkos and Jonathan Marchessault. And of course, they did not score. They couldn't score. And so despite the fact that Nashville did make such an investment into those two players, Mike, again, maybe I cover the Nashville Predators. I'm pretty close to the situation, so I'm looking for more of an outside perspective of, like, does it seem like Barry Trotz is likely or trying to move on from either of these players during the summer? Or do you think it's just kind of the result of, well, it's noise and it's things we need to talk about while we wait for the Stanley Cup final to end and the draft to get here?
Well, if we believe the rumor mill, Marchessault's name has been at the top of it. Again, the fact, as we mentioned with Zibanejad, he was 32, Marchessault was 34, and he's got 4 years left on his contract. That's a tough nut to crack. That is a tough contract to move. Now, he didn't have a terrible year, 56 points, only 21 goals. I think the age and the term are the biggest hurdles here. I don't know whether Barry Trotz wants to eat salary 1 year into a 5-year deal, but he might have to. And that's just the reality. And if they think that these contracts are bad now, all of a sudden they want to reset or reshake up the chemistry, they're probably going to have to eat money on that deal. Stamkos has a no move clause. Marchessault has a no move clause, but I've heard differing opinions about whether there's a window here or there's some sort of limited situation that they can move him without the no move clause. It's still foggy on that. But if I'm saying which one of them is more likely to move, I would say Marchessault over Stamkos. What are your thoughts?
I would agree. I still think that, Barry Trotz, though, is not going to trade Marchessault or aggressively look to trade Marchessault unless Marchessault is the one who maybe asks for it or signs off on it. So whether he has movement protection or not, I think that they're going to treat it as if he does, or at least has a say into where he goes. I think that from everything that I've heard, he's open to it, but I don't think there is any sort of demand of a trade or anything like that. And again, I think between the two of them, it's most likely that Marchessault would be the one to move. Now, we have seen guys like Ryan McDonough last season. He asked to be traded back to Tampa, and Barry Trotz granted that wish. So he's definitely shown a tendency to work with his players and take care of his players, and when they've kind of reached that certain level of status in their career. But again, I just think that there was so much that went wrong this season that everyone is almost tempted to just flush it, almost not flush it in the sense that pretend it never happened. It's like, yeah, let's remember that this happened and how terrible it was, and let's never do it again. But I think that maybe with a little bit more time to reflect, they're more willing, I think, to just chalk it up to, hey, you know what? That was an outlier. Let's just move on, because we know that if a team is the sum of its parts, if you look at the parts, we're better than this. So Nashville will definitely be an interesting team to keep an eye on this year. Lower expectations maybe, but that might be a good thing for them. Might be where they thrive. Do want to move on to, of course, one of the biggest storylines of the summer here, Mitch Marner. I feel like a lot of us have more or less treated it as a foregone conclusion that he is not coming back to Toronto, but it still hasn't officially been, I guess, announced by him or by anyone. So, of course, rumors over the weekend are that the Leafs are not engaged at all with Marner and his camp. And, now it's kind of seeming even more likely that he is not returning to the Leafs next year. So, obviously, we knew that if he were to hit the free agent market this summer, he would be the belle of the ball, right? The biggest name on the free agent market this year. But looking at the free agent market of, say, the past decade in the NHL, I mean, players like this don't come available very often. So how do you think he ranks maybe in, the free agent market over the last 10 years?
He's probably number 2 behind John Tavares, ironically. He was a number 1 center, number 1 overall pick. And we saw like 5-6 teams of San Jose and Detroit and Buffalo and Toronto, and I think Montreal was involved. So, Stamkos never came to fruition. He, tested it. He talked it, and there was that window before July 1st when you could talk to teams, and he talked to Toronto and, got the overture from Canadian Tire and the mayor of Toronto, that whole thing. And then he decided to go back to Tampa and win Stanley Cups. But Marner's up there. I think the only thing that puts him beneath Tavares is that he's a winger and Tavares is a center. They're the same age. I believe Tavares was 28 when he signed the 7-year deal with Toronto, and Marner is 28 now. I'm not surprised about how things have unfolded. I think it was Andy Strickland reported that it was likely that Toronto that he would not return to Toronto. I could have told you that probably going into the year when he would not waive the no move clause to even address potential trades last summer. He says, I just want to play out the season. And then the Leafs were getting frustrated with the inability of him, Darren Ferris and Brad Treliving, to negotiate an extension, not even talk. Like, we'll talk after the season. No, they wanted to find out. And then the whole thing that happened with the Mikko Rantanen 3-way deal, supposedly that was, or a deal involving Marner, and they asked him to waive a no-move clause, and that didn't happen. At that point, pretty much you knew that he was toast in Toronto. What I think the surprising thing here is, of the reports that have come out, is that Toronto doesn't want to talk to him. I've suspected all along that he didn't want to return to Toronto because he's been, as has been reported, he's been the piñata of Toronto fans and the player that has been blamed for their playoff ineptitude. Well, that's partially true, but the organization wants to go a different direction, and Brad Treliving likes bigger players and tougher players, and Mitch Marner is neither of those. So the fact that the Leafs want to move on from him is maybe surprising to a lot of people. It's not surprising to me.
I also think that if you're going to play in Toronto, you are just sort of resigning yourself to the fact that at some point, to some degree, you are going to be a piñata for the fan base and the media market there. I think that's just kind of, it comes with the territory of playing for the Leafs. But yeah, it will be, he will have no shortage of suitors this summer. That is for sure. Want to move on to talking about the Olympics. So the first 6 players for each Olympic team were announced on Monday. Of course, not a ton of surprises as far as the players who were named to their respective rosters, at least for the first 6. But I would say the biggest surprise would be for Team USA. The biggest surprise would be the player who was not named to the roster, or players, and that would be the goaltenders. Of course, Connor Hellebuyck and or Jake Oettinger not on the first 6 for Team USA. Now, USA, that's kind of been their thing that they're known for, is the goaltending. And I think that this has been an ongoing conversation after the Four Nations face off, and then you get to the playoffs and Connor Hellebuyck kind of fell apart. And it was just, it kind of led to this discussion of, is the torch being passed? Is it going to be Jake Oettinger now? Has he supplanted Connor Hellebuyck as the best US born goalie? Now, of course, Connor Hellebuyck has just won the Vezina Trophy. He just won the Hart Trophy. And yet he is not on this first 6 for the USA. So, of course, Bill Guerin, GM of Team USA, was asked about it. He said, quote, "It was just kind of the thing that we talked about before we did it for the Four Nations. Do we add a goalie? Do we not add a goalie? I just felt it was best to stay consistent and let the goalies play it out during the season." So interesting. Do you think, what do you think of Guerin's comments? Do you think he's just kind of being diplomatic? Because to me, it seems like maybe they're a little hesitant after the year that played out for both of these goalies, that they know that if they named Hellebuyck as one of the first 6, they would be making a commitment to him as the guy, as the number 1 goalie. And maybe they're just not ready to do that just yet.
Right. And I think that that's the case, but just because you named him one of the initial 6 does not mean, we saw Canada in 2002 and 2010, they went in with Cujo as the number 1 goaltender and then switched to Marty Brodeur. And they went in with Marty Brodeur in 2010 and they switched to Roberto Luongo. There's nothing that says that you can't switch from from Hellebuyck to Oettinger just because you selected Hellebuyck as one of the top 6. I think that's sort of I understand what Guerin is saying, and he's saying, okay, let them play out the season. Let's see. But everybody knows, unless there's an injury, Oettinger and Hellebuyck are going to be on that team. It's a question of who the third goalie is going to be. Is it going to be Gibson or Swayman or whoever? But they're both going to be there. They just pushed that decision off until December. But it is interesting, though, and I'm doing this off the top of my head. I know Philip Grubauer got selected by Germany. I think UC Saros got selected by Finland. Other than that, nobody selected goaltenders. Canada did not select Jordan Binnington, and I thought they were going to because obviously, he stole the Four Nations, but they didn't. So it wasn't just Guerin who was pushing off that decision until December.
Yeah, that is true. I do think Denmark did pick Freddie Anderson, but that's a fairly obvious choice. I don't think anyone was really expecting much of a competition there. But yeah, and to your point, it's not like the U.S. named a different goaltender to their first 6 instead of Hellebuyck or Oettinger. Of course, the first 6 for Team USA, just to review, are Austin Matthews, both of the Tkachuk brothers, Quinn Hughes, Jack Eichel, and Charlie McAvoy. So again, no major surprises there. Like you said, just kind of kicking the can down the road a little bit on this decision for the goaltending for Team USA in the Olympics next year. Want to wrap up today's show talking about the draft, the upcoming draft. It is getting closer, specifically with the Montreal Canadiens. They've got back-to-back selections in the first round this year. So they're picking 16th and 17th. Again, though, with these picks and where they are in the order, they're probably not going to be reaping the rewards of those selections for a while. It's not like they're going to be selecting anyone who's going to be impacting them, in the next year or so. With that in mind, and considering the Canadiens were a playoff team this year, Do you think there's a chance that they trade one or maybe even both of those first round picks in order to maybe kind of like what you were talking about with Buffalo earlier in terms of, trading it to get a real hockey piece in return that's going to make their team better now as opposed to several years from now?
It's ironic because I did a Montreal Canadiens podcast, and they asked a very similar question, because there are rumors out there that their plan or their hope is, to pair both first round picks and hopefully trade up into the top 10. And I can remember back, and I was at this draft, the 2015 draft, when Boston had 3 consecutive first round picks in the middle of the first round, and they wanted to trade up into the top 5 to get Noah Hannafin. And Carolina was at number 5, and they didn't want to do it. And then the Bruins were stuck with 3 first-round picks, which in that draft, you shouldn't be stuck with. There were guys like Kyle Connor and Thomas Chabot who were selected after them, and they ended up taking Zach Senyshyn, Jacob Zaboral, and Jake DeBrusk, and none of them are still in that organization. So I'm sure Montreal is hoping they can pair both first round picks together to move up. I just don't know whether anybody is going to bite. There seems to be a top 5 in this draft, and then it drops off a little bit. And then I've been told by people that anybody from 6 to 20 is essentially the same. It's just a question of what team likes what player. So I think they're going to end up probably staying at 16 and 17 and drafting where they are.
All right. Well, definitely a storyline to keep an eye out for on draft day. Even with the draft being decentralized this year, I'm sure they will be on the phone quite a bit trying to move those picks, and they will not be the only ones. So we will keep an eye on that. For today, though, that is going to do it for this edition of the Wraparound. Again, thank you to Sticks.com, as always, for sponsoring us. For Mike Augello, I'm Emma Lingan. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you next time.